The glass walls of the Worthington estate stretched toward the English sky like transparent monuments to wealth. But inside, Amelia Worthington existed in quiet, invisible despair. At only 17, her limbs had already become museum pieces still, untouched, a reminder of what was lost. Before the accident, she had danced so beautifully that strangers cried at recitals. Her plank shoes worn soft with passion and discipline. She was the light of every room, the proudest smile on her father's stern face, and the reason her late mother would twirl in the kitchen, whispering, "She's going to touch the stars." Home from a charity banquet, their car spun across black ice and slammed into an oak tree that refused to bend. Her father escaped with only a fractured rib. Amelia's spinal cord didn't. Since then, doctors in white coats and confidence had become the family's unwanted guests. They spoke of surgeries, implants, miracle technologies, and each time would sign another blank check and promise his daughter that this time would be different. But each time it wasn't. The machines hummed, the therapists spoke in soft tones, and Amelia stayed in her chair trapped, humiliated and slowly disappearing from the world. Her friends visited at first out of duty and discomfort, then gradually faded like the sunset she could still see from her third-floor room, but never feel on her skin. Her father grew more silent with every failed treatment. Though he never said it, Amelia knew he blamed himself. He worked longer hours, traveled farther, bought more companies, but nothing he acquired could buy back her smile or the music that once played from her soul. She didn't cry anymore. Crying felt too loud. She simply sat, day after day, by the bay window, watching life outside go on while hers waited in a pause no one could unpress. And then, one August morning, when the air was thick with dew and guilt, Charles's car broke down on a winding country road in Yorkshire. He had left the estate before dawn, needing escape more than sleep, but even escape seemed to mock him. As he cursed beneath his breath, he looked across a wooden fence and saw something strange. A man, old and wiry, with skin tanned like leather, knelt beside a small lamb whose leg bent awkwardly. Charles watched, first out of boredom, then disbelief. As the man closed his eyes, whispered something inaudible, and pressed his hands gently over the lamb's limb. Within moments, the creature struggled, stumbled, then stood legs straight, its eyes wide, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Charles thought he was hallucinating. He stepped out, approached, and asked the man what he had just done. The farmer looked up, his eyes pale blue, like the sky behind him, and replied, "Just reminded her she could stand. Sometimes the body listens if you speak the right way." Charles, a man who had spent decades among surgeons, biotech pioneers, and neuroengineers, almost laughed, but something in the man's voice silenced his skepticism. "What's your name?" Charles asked. "Elias," the man said, brushing straw from his knees. "Do you heal animals?" "Sometimes." "Sometimes they heal themselves." Charles hesitated, his lips moving before his brain could stop them. "Would you come meet my daughter?" Elias didn't ask for details. He nodded. That evening, back at the mansion, Amelia refused to come down. She wasn't in the mood for her father's strange visitors or his last hope miracles. Didn't knock or try to charm her. He simply walked in, took off his shoes at the door, and sat on the carpet near her chair like he had known her for years. For minutes, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "You miss dancing." Her breath caught. "How do you know?" He smiled. "It's still in your eyes. You're just watching from a locked window." She shook her head, no. At first, her voice quiet but firm. Then, as if a wind passed through her, she nodded. Elias placed one hand gently on her shin and closed his eyes. His other hand rested over her ankle, warm and rough from work, but calming like a grandfather's hand at bedtime. Amelia felt nothing at first, just the usual void, but then came the strangest warmth, not from her legs, but from somewhere deeper, almost like someone had reopened a forgotten hallway in her chest and let light back in. She blinked, heart racing, unsure if it was fear or hope. Elias said nothing, only whispered again, "You don't have to walk high. Just want you to believe it's still inside you." For the first time in years, she slept without nightmares, without clenched fists or painkillers under her pillow. And for the first time since the accident, Charles stayed at her door all night, just listening to her breathe. The next morning, sunlight poured through Amelia's window like liquid gold, warm and steady, a small miracle in itself after so many cold, gray days where light seemed to avoid her entirely, as though even the sun had given up hope. She opened her eyes slowly and blinked, unsure at first why her chest felt so still. Then she realized it was because, for once, she hadn't woken from a nightmare of the crash or the silence that followed it. Her father was seated across the room in the armchair, still in yesterday's shirt, his tie loosened and his eyes rimmed red, not from grief, but from something gentler, watchfulness. Love, the fragile hope of a man who dared not speak the word. Healing out loud. Amelia sat up straighter, surprised that her body felt less heavy, and even more surprised when her father stood without a word and said, "He's downstairs, if you want to see him again." Elias was outside, talking softly to a gardener and holding a small twig, explaining how water flows through trees like breath through lungs. And when he saw Amelia wheeled out onto the terrace, he simply smiled, nodded once, and said, "The sky feels different today, doesn't it?" She didn't know what to say to a man who spoke in riddles, but made her feel like her legs were less foreign than they were yesterday. Over the next few days, Elias visited again and again, never with tools, never with medicines or equipment, just his quiet voice, his open palms, and his strange way of sitting on the floor like the world wasn't rushing anywhere. He asked her to close her eyes and imagine walking barefoot across fields, then dancing under moonlight, then running through shallow rivers that laughed with her every step. Amelia, who hadn't danced in years, found herself crying as she pictured those scenes, not because she felt sad, but because something in her believed they might not be fiction anymore. He never asked her to try to move. He never forced her. But on the sixth day, when a strong breeze lifted her hair and the scent of lavender filled the air, Elias held her foot gently and said, "Just wiggle one toe. Not for anyone else. Just for yourself. Show your soul you remember." It sounded so small, so ridiculous, so impossible. But Amelia closed her eyes, took a long, trembling breath, and tried not hard. Not with strain, but with intention, with memory, with every ounce of herself that still longed to dance. And for the first time in 1,111 days, her right toe moved. Not much, barely noticeable, but it moved. She gasped. Her father dropped the glass of water he was holding. It shattered, unnoticed. Elias only smiled and whispered, "That's the earth answering back." What followed was not some magical, instant recovery, but something strange, day, moment by moment, feeling returned. Sometimes it was painful, a burning tingle like electricity through dead wires. Sometimes it was quiet, like the legs themselves were learning to remember. But the real miracle wasn't just in the motion, it was in Amelia's face, which began to bloom again with color, with curiosity, with a kind of wonder that no surgeon had ever inspired. She asked questions. She laughed again. She demanded to go outside without a blanket, and when a bird landed on the stone railing near her, she reached out and said hello, like it might talk back. Her physical therapist, who had been coming for months without real results, stood dumbstruck as Amelia lifted her leg off the chair 2 inches by herself and then burst into tears, not from pain, but joy, the kind that wrecks you in the most beautiful way. Charles, once so composed in every boardroom, cried openly at dinner one night after she asked if he could build her a ballet bar again. They brought it into her room the next morning. She didn't use it for balance, yet, just to touch it, to feel the wood under her fingers and remember the way she used to lean in before every performance like it was a partner in a sacred dance. Elias never called himself a healer. When journalists began to get whispers of what was happening, of the billionaire's daughter who might walk again because of a poor farmer with no medical degree, Charles had security tighten the gates. He didn't want the world crowding in, didn't want this sacred space turned into headlines or hashtags. But one evening, as the sky blushed orange and pink and the wind carried the scent of the moors, Amelia turned her head sharply toward Elias and asked, "Why me?" Elias didn't pretend to misunderstand. He walked to her side, crouched again, like always, and said, "Because you never truly gave up, you were just waiting for someone to whisper that it was okay to try again." And then, with only the trees to witness, Amelia placed both hands on the arms of her chair and slowly pulled herself to her feet. She didn't walk, not yet, but she stood on her own for 10 seconds, then 15. Later that night, Charles sat on the edge of her bed and asked Elias quietly, "What do I owe you?" Elias only shook his head. "You don't owe me. She did the work. I just reminded her. But there must be something I can give, land, a house, something." Elias looked around at the glittering chandeliers, the imported rugs, the priceless paintings, and said, "Give her a space to be free. That's worth more than anything you could write on paper." And then, just like that, he left. No address, no number. He walked barefoot down the long drive as twilight painted the estate in silver and silence. Amelia watched him go from her window, standing with her hands on the sill, and whispered, "Thank you," to the wind. The next day, she walked 5 steps with help. By the end of the month, she danced with trembling legs in the center of her bedroom, no music playing except the rhythm of her own breath. And Charles watched from the doorway, pressing his hands over his mouth as if trying to keep his heart from spilling out. The autumn leaves began to fall like soft confetti over the Worthington estate, as if nature itself had risen to celebrate the quiet miracle unfolding behind its manicured hedges. And within Amelia's world, silent, sterile, and draped in hopelessness, new life pulsed through every corridor her feet could now begin to touch. With help from her therapists, she had graduated from 5 steps to 20, and from 20 to full laps of the terrace with a walker. Each step slow but defiant, as though she were reclaiming every second that paralysis had stolen. The news inevitably leaked, perhaps a nurse, perhaps a neighbor or a curious groundskeeper, but soon whispers turned to murmurs, and murmurs into headlines. Billionaire's daughter walks again thanks to a mysterious farmer, healer, and the man who did what medicine couldn't. Helicopters hovered briefly above the countryside. Paparazzi perched in hedges, and unsolicited interview requests flooded Charles Worthington's office like tidal waves. But Charles, once a man who craved the spotlight, rejected them all. "This isn't for sale," he told his publicist. "This is sacred." Amelia agreed, though a part of her wished she could find Elias, a guna, for cameras or thank yous or documentaries. Same lawn where they'd once only wheeled her. He had vanished without leaving a footprint, not even a trace for the staff or the driver who'd offered him a ride. "He's not the type to leave a card," Charles had said, both awed and bewildered. And though she asked around the village, nearby no one had heard of a farmer named Elias. Some thought she was exaggerating. Others thought it was a metaphor. But Amelia didn't need their belief. Her legs were the proof. She could stand. She could move. She could live. And more than anything, she could dance again. Slowly, she resumed her ballet. First, at night, alone in her room, with trembling calves and the old bar her father had reinstalled. Then, with music, Tchaikovsky and Debussy, flooding her soul like prayers answered in melody. Each pirouette, no matter how off balance, felt like a resurrection. Her muscles screamed, her feet blistered, but she smiled through it all. The kind of smile that no operation had ever brought her. And then came the idea small, at first, like a whisper, to perform again, not for fame or applause, but for purpose. She wanted to raise money for children like her, those left behind by medicine and drowned in despair. She would call it the Standing Soul Gala. And it would not be about perfection, it would be about hope. Charles was hesitant. "You're still recovering," he said softly, but she answered, "And that's the point." She trained for months, ignoring the noise of the media and the pitying looks of old friends who didn't believe she'd make it to the stage, but she did. On a cold December evening, in a grand theater her father purchased anonymously, Amelia stepped onto a dimly lit stage. The crowd fell silent, hundreds of faces staring at the girl who had been confined to a chair for 3 years and was now dressed in white, her hair pulled into a simple bun, her feet encased in fresh pointe shoes. As the music began, she closed her eyes, thought of Elias, and moved not with the grace of before, but with the raw power of someone who had known stillness and chosen motion anyway. Every step, every arabesque, every shaky turn was a letter. In a story, her body was riding across the air. I survived. I believed. I'm still dancing. By the time the final note faded, the audience was on their feet, weeping, cheering, holding each other in stunned reverence. Charles didn't clap, he cried into his hands, overwhelmed not just by pride, but by witnessing the kind of miracle no amount of wealth had ever bought him. Amelia bowed, legs trembling, then turned toward the wings, and for the briefest second, just beyond the curtains, she saw Emilius, or maybe a man like him. Or maybe it was just her soul remembering the kindness that saved it. She blinked, and he was gone. But the peace remained. Over the next year, the gala raised millions. She spoke at hospitals, visited injured children, told her story without shame or embellishment. It wasn't medicine alone, she'd say. It was faith, not in religion, in possibility, in something bigger than we see. The world clung to her words, and yet, despite all the attention, she remained grounded, grateful. One spring day, as she walked through a field on her own no-walker, no ad, she came across a lamb stuck between stones. Her breath caught, her memory flashing back. She knelt, gently freed its leg, and whispered, "You're stronger than you know," just as Elias once had. The lamb ran off, and Amelia stood there, crying and laughing all at once. It wasn't just about walking anymore. It was about the deeper healing, the kind that reminded the soul it had legs long before the body did. Charles, now older, quieter, no longer the fierce tycoon, but a man softened by pain and miracle, spent more time at home, planting trees in the garden and writing letters to no one in particular. On her 18th birthday, Amelia found one such letter tucked inside a drawer of her old dresser. It read, "You taught me what power really is, Millie. It's not control. It's not money. It's the ability to keep hoping when the world tells you not to. Thank you for saving me, too." She pressed the letter to her chest and wept, the good kind of weeping, the kind that waters everything inside. And though she never saw Elias again, she felt him everywhere in the way the wind rustled the trees, in the way her legs carried her across the grass, in the sudden warmth that would touch her spine during quiet moments of solitude. He had changed her. He had changed everything, not by fixing her, but by reminding her she wasn't broken. And that, she realized, was the greatest healing of all.